I don't. Oh. Good morning, everybody. Happy Wild Wednesday. My name is Valerie Sunyak, and I'm happy to be here again for another webcast of Wild Women in Learning and Development. This is actually our sixth episode, and I'm happy to have MelissaLamson as my guest this morning. And so we'll dive into a great conversation with her. I feel like this can go longer than an hour, so we might have to have this part one. So before we get started, I just want to say that Wild is fueled by women for everyone. So everyone is welcome as part of our webcast. I don't want this to be restrictive to just women. I think we all can share some great things with each other. Also, this is a no sorry zone. Unless you've truly done something really bad, then we hope you'll say you're sorry. But I always like to say it's a no sorry zone. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit, right? Yeah. About how sometimes women are conditioned to say sorry about things that they shouldn't be sorry for. So what I want to do is I type this into the chat, and I want to just share this before we start with Melissa. Let's see if I can get this. This is a book that Melissa has written. This is her latest book, The New Global Manager. It is available on Amazon. And maybe when we share your story, you can talk a little bit about the hashtag women book that kind of, sure. Communication. So without further ado, quickly grab your cocktail, mocktail, coffee, and whatever you feel like drinking wherever you're located. I don't know. I've got my coffee, and I have my coffee and my water. Melissa, I'd kind of like to start off by if you'd share with all of us kind of your story and kind of where you have come from and kind of where you're at now.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. So where have I come from? So I started, I guess, relevant to the topic. I've always been really interested in women and empowering women, and I guess I would also say girls, and was always involved in activism around helping girls learn more about science and math and tech, and I thought that was, always really exciting because that was, unfortunately, the statistics showed that they had less sort of confidence around those areas, not necessarily less competence. And so I was really interested in, when I saw that, to kind of build on that. And I wanted to kind of transfer this into a career, sort of my passion around women in leadership, as well as culture, diversity in general, was really a fascinating topic. And I started my career in the art world, and at the same time, I was doing a lot of volunteer work in various organizations like Parents Anonymous and Peace in the Middle East and all different kinds of things I was involved in. And I started to realize that was actually more interesting to me than the art world. So I still collect art and I love art, but it was just in general as a career, it wasn't as exciting as sort of helping people, if you will. And so I thought I could either go in on the nonprofit level, or I could go into the corporate world and see how does the corporate world work in terms of inclusion and diversity. And so I started my career by getting a master's in diversity management and went to work for Patricia Arredondo, who's one of the founders of the field of cross-cultural psychology.
Oh.
Yeah. And so that was my background, cross-cultural psychology, and then also understanding how cultural diversity works. And I was working for several companies like United Airlines and State Street Global Advisors and Gillette in Boston in the US. And then I saw that there was an opportunity to learn more about what was this topic internationally, because we were doing a lot of anti-sexual harassment. We were doing a lot of cultural diversity training, but it was all in the US context. And while, of course, that was very interesting, I was curious about what this was internationally.
Right.
So I had the opportunity to move to Germany. And to make a long story short, I was based in Germany for 10 years, and I was one of the only people there who was practicing diversity. And I was running two companies there. I had my cultural diversity business that was international, and then I had a diversity business that was based primarily in Germany and Europe. Mm-hmm. And we provided all different types of services and strategy development. So we helped the German government set up their anti-discrimination law, which is in practice today with corporations there. So it was a really interesting experience. And then I moved back to the US for personal reasons. And when I came back to the US, it was sort of like interesting to figure out where I was going to position myself, being a market that was, flooded with diversity practitioners, which is thankfully, I love that that there are so many of us, and cross-cultural practitioners. And so I really thought, well, I have this global spin on it, so maybe that would be an interesting way to kind of identify and segment myself or differentiate myself in the market. So I talk about doing global leadership, and in that global leadership, one big pillar of what I do is to support companies creating more gender balance in their organizations. And then within that, I teach workshops, both for men and for women, on how to understand men and women. And so that's what I'm currently been doing for about 7 years.
Wonderful. And first I wanted to address this question before I asked you another one. Somebody had asked, whereabout in Germany were you located?
Oh, I was in Berlin, and then Hamburg, and then Frankfurt.
Yeah, and then somebody said, Berlin's my favorite city.
Awesome city.
I understand Berlin is amazing. So, and so I just wanted to kind of comment on that, on the global diversity. And I think that is huge. So actually I work for a company that was recently acquired by an Indian company. So in the world of work, I've never worked for a company that was acquired by, another company in Europe. So things are very much changing. And so we need to look at things very much globally.
Yes.
And I love that. So I'm just interested, because you had said you kind of had started out in kind of the world diversity. What differences are you kind of seeing from when you started out to now?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I think it's really on point for our topic. It was much more, I don't know if binary, what's the word for multinary? So it was very much about this culture and that gender and this sexual orientation and this age. We talked a lot about sort of categories. And I think it was important to do that because it had never really been discussed before back when I really started in the beginning of the diversity movement, if you will. Right. And I think it was important to understand what are the specific concerns, issues, successes, opportunities within segmented groups or specific groups that have been either disadvantaged or marginalized or discriminated against. And so what's been interesting is to see the conversation really evolve to how do we talk about bias in general, whatever the person's categories that they belong to, how am I relating to that person as an individual? How do we really try to move away from categories in terms of this is the way the Germans always do things, or this is the way women always do things, or this is the way, right, the boomers do things. How do we move away from that, but still honor it? And that's what's really been interesting in the work that I've been doing lately is, to have that conversation about how multifaceted each individual is and what piece of that is important to them about their identity. So anyway, it gets very complex, but I think that's really the trend that I've seen.
But aren't there also what we would call archetypes? So there are archetypes for certain cultures. So kind of coming from a German culture, I think there's some archetypes of so can you kind of talk about archetype? I know I'm probably getting off in a different direction, but I just wonder what the difference, because there's a stereotype and there's an archetype, maybe.
That's right. That's a good point. So the way I look at it, in my book I mention it, and then the way I teach it is I talk about cultural dimensions, and I'll say, so for example, I think there are 4 that are most critical or interesting for companies to look at, especially in global teamwork. And though, of course, many, but I think these 4 pop up most often. And I look at the dimension from sort of a scale from 1 to 10 and say, where does someone fall on that dimension? So it's not that they're absolutely flexible about time or absolutely rigid about time, but where are the tendencies? And it's interesting in doing this for 22 years to see that there's a pattern, right? So I'll ask multicultural groups, where do you fall? And it is, 9 times out of 10, if not more, that Germans will place themselves on being more rigid about time. Maybe not extremely, but at least more so. Where people from India, for example, will say they're more flexible about time. And again, this isn't about good or bad. It's just about where they see themselves, right, on the spectrum. And so I guess to your point about archetypes, I think there are tendencies and trends for sure within cultures. And then, of course, it depends on how much. Okay, so the reason why I talk about the model first or the dimensions first is I want people not to say, people from India are this, but I want them to say, okay, there is this dimension around time, rigidity, and flexibility. Now, the person that I'm interacting with, how do they fit into that model? So that instead of stereotyping someone immediately by saying, oh, I've learned that people from Germany are rigid, so now I'm interacting with a German, so I know that they're rigid, or I'm going to label them as rigid. I know the cultural dimension. Now, how does this person I'm interacting with fit into it? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And kind of putting it into the perspective of learning and development as practitioners, no matter what our role is, if we're a designer, developer, instructor, those are things we need to know. We need to be sensitive to those kind of cultural things. So if
That's
we're
right.
being very US centric and thinking, okay, the class starts on time, everybody needs to get here on time, and I'm going to, that doesn't always happen with people that may be of different cultures, that they're going to be there right on time.
That's right.
Flex ourselves.
Sure.
Right.
And certainly I think that's the challenge too. If you're managing a global team, do you set the expectation, hey, I'd really like us all to be on time, right? And set that as a guideline or a rule and try to get buy-in on that? Or do you say, well, I'm going to be culturally relative here and allow anybody to show up whatever they want to, and because I'm being culturally sensitive? I mean, that's always the other interesting aspect. So I'm a big proponent of, make your expectations clear, explain why it's important for everybody to start on time, talk to people individually about that, and, negotiate it if you need to. But I think it's important for us to have guidelines and principles that we're operating by, right?
And I think what you said, expectations are huge. And I see that we see them less and less in business, and it only takes a couple moments to just set expectations. And there's sometimes a lack of communication because, especially in the Western world, we are so focused on tasks.
Right.
And getting things done that we sometimes don't do the background work.
That's right.
So absolutely. So I kind of wanted to shift a little bit because this is another conversation we could go off on. It's such a great topic. I love this so much. So like I said, if we can work it out, that we can come back with a part 2, that would be amazing. But I kind of wanted to shift it a little bit more to women. And by the way, Friday is, I want to throw this in here, International Women's Day. So
yes,
throw that out there. So what are some of the examples, Melissa, of the way women communicate that are different from men? And can we talk a little bit about where those differences might come from?
Yes. So originally, I'm going to start with that first. Originally, I used to teach brain differences, which was something that came out of research that Harvard was doing. And they talked about how men and women are wired differently, and that's why women perhaps are better multitaskers and men are better monotaskers, or why we sort of think about everything all at once and how it all links together, and men compartmentalize, right? And then a good friend of mine, Phyllis Stewart-Perez, she might actually even be on this cast, but she's been working at Stanford in the work-life balance department. She's the director there. And she was letting me know, by the way, she originally said Stanford is finding that there are no brain differences between men and women. And so the research today is kind of leaning towards not that our brains actually aren't different. And there's still a lot not known about the brain. But the way it's playing out is that it's really all about socialization and expectations and the way that we're groomed when we're young, right? Or the images we're seeing on TV and so forth. And so I can't say for sure. Oh, also in terms of culturally, there's some interesting studies where they found that they thought that men were always the hunters, and they would go out, hunting for the communities back in the day, and they would wear these big, heavy boots, and they were carrying heavy animals on their backs, and that's why they were finding these giant footprints. And so they kind of assumed that these were men who were out hunting, and that's why men have this sense of focus, and women have the sense of sort of caretaking back in the community. And actually, they found that maybe that's not true even. In fact, these big shoes, a lot of women would wear because they were carrying big baskets full of all the community resources and food and maybe even children on them. And so they made these special boots so that they could just support all of that. And that maybe these footprints were actually women's footprints.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So there's there's all this new data that's kind of saying, wow, we've looked at all this stuff through gender biased eyes potentially. And it may not necessarily be the case. Having said all that, doing this for the amount of years that I've been doing it, and I think there's a lot of validity to the great books that have come out. The Confidence Code is an excellent book. I still think that some of Sheryl Sandberg's data is really relevant. Obviously, Barbara Annis has done a lot of gender research that's, I think, still very valid. So to answer your original question about differences, what I see play out in companies today, I would say most commonly, is this women needing harmony, a sense of harmony and a sense of community and collaboration that their language really supports. So we use a lot of we words and we phrases, and we talk a lot about how reaching consensus, and we want everyone to feel a part of the conversation and feel a part of the decision. I mean, obviously not every woman every time.
Right.
That clear?
Exactly.
But especially when we're working with other women, we want to create really a sense of harmony and a good feeling of working together. And that's not as necessary for men. Of course, again, not all men all the time, but men are much more apt to kind of stay focused on topic and task and not worry so much about do we have consensus? Do we have harmony in the room? Are people feeling good about this decision? And in fact, they tend to really appreciate more of a hierarchical view. They like direction. They like to know who's in charge, who's making decisions, who's executing that decisions, who do I follow? Because that's clear and that's efficient and that's fast for them. So it's interesting when you see those two things intersect. There's an example in the Confidence Code, which I find really fascinating. It's two professors, a male professor and a female professor. Mm-hmm. And they're walking by the female professor's assistant. And the assistant happens to be also a woman. And when they walk by, the professor says, oh, hey, when you get a chance, Sarah, I'd really appreciate it if you might consider just throwing these out there if it's not too much trouble, because I'd really like this before my meeting at 2:00, and it'd be really helpful. I appreciate it. And they walk on down the hall. Of course, the assistant says, sure, I'd be happy to. And they walk down the hallway, and the male professor says to her, you're not going to gain any respect talking to her like that. And she says, what are you talking about? He says, that's too weak. Just tell her what you want and tell her to do it and move on. And she said, no, it's really important for me to talk to her like that because I want her to feel part of the team, right? And feel as though we're partners in this, and not that she's just working for me. And he just looked at her confused, like that didn't make any sense. One other interesting comment is the word help. So I've just recently had a bunch of conversations with men about this. And you can literally, if you say, hey, could you help me with something? You can literally see men look either confused or kind of repulsed. So next time
because I say that. I know I say that. I don't know about some of the women in the chat.
Yeah.
And then I asked, what can I help you with? Right. I asked a man that yesterday, my coworker, what can I help you with? And it was dead silence.
Dead silence, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Now, it depends, of course, on the man and if they're used to it, if the relationship you have, of course, all of that. But it's funny because I'll notice that if I use the word help, sometimes I just test it just to see if it still works, if it's still correct. But I'll use it and I won't get an answer, just like your experience. And then maybe 15 minutes, half an hour, a few hours later, my male colleague will come back to me or male client will come back to me and say, so I was thinking about this and I want to kind of run it by you. And he'll jump right into whatever it is that basically I asked him if he needed help on. And essentially it's like he couldn't say, yes, I need help, because that just didn't compute with him. But he did need help, but he needed to reframe it in his own words and come back to me and say, hey, could I run something by you? Could we walk this through together? And that was his version of basically accepting help, if you will.
Yeah. Or sometimes I say, how can I support you? But that probably sounds, so does that sound weak? I don't know. As a woman, does that not?
Well, what I've understood from men, because I do workshops with men and I ask them all the time because I'm dying of curiosity about it, right? But they say it makes them, it sounds like they're a little kid, and it makes them feel like, well, yeah, I'm not an idiot. Of course I can help you. Of course I know how to do something. Or it makes them feel weak if we ask them if they need help. So they, especially in the business context, it's kind of all about who's cool, who's strong, it's much more, I'm not saying this is necessarily a corporate culture or a culture in a company that we want to support and that we want to carry on. But just to understand that the impact of the way we communicate still has a certain effect, right? Whether it's on women or on men. I mean, you know this too, like we as women can be really, really critical, not only of ourselves, but really critical of other women. It may be also of men, but there are, just lots and lots of studies where you've seen the emails where the two colleagues switched email names and the woman was sending emails out as a man and vice versa. And they had these incredibly different experiences and reaction from customers. So we carry all these biases and perceptions in our brain. And when these certain words pop up, it makes us go like, oh, whether it's a man or a woman that's speaking.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I consider kind of my personality a strong personality where I will ask or tell let me go back, tell more than ask. And as a woman, I feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that, because then as a woman, we're called a bitch. So how do we be strong, but we don't want to be a bitch. So
that's right. I think it's really important. That's why I think it's really important to develop individual relationships and set expectations and say, look, I really like to own if you're a more direct person and if you're more of I show these gender characteristics and then I say, of course, especially, in certain industries, and I work a lot in tech, the women who are in tech, they've been working with men, studying with men, working with for forever. So a lot of them kind of by nature have these more direct styles. They have more focused conversations. They'll be more of a tell style than an ask style. And then if they're operating in different contexts, they might come across as being more tough, right? Or more maybe not as approachable. And so I usually coach them, hey, just kind of own your style, but make it obvious to people and make your expectations clear. So say, hey, this is my style, this is my personality. I'm a little more direct, but don't take it personally. I don't mean anything by it. And in fact, you might get accustomed to it and you'll see how fast we can get things done without a lot of words.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I've started to do that.
Yeah,
I've started to do that, and I've started to say, like, I just started a new job. I said to some of my coworkers, if I don't come in and say good morning to you right away, please don't be offended. But I get so focused that I go right to what I need to do, and then 10 minutes later, I'll be okay. So I don't, and I've started doing that when I start a project with people, really talking more about how do we work together, and
that's great.
How do we communicate.
Yeah, and I would also challenge that a tiny bit too, in that I would say most of the successful women I know do work really hard. Like they come into the office, right? And I know this is going to sound funny that I'm saying it this way, but they come into the office and they just heads down and just working. And they are very task oriented. And it's not that I would actually say that more women I know need or don't need hi, good morning, chit chat, soft talk and all that kind of stuff. They're really actually very task focused at work and very busy. And actually, I think that might be hurting us sometimes. Because and I see this all the time too, who's in the coffee corners? Who's around the water cooler? If you're in a cool tech company, who's playing ping pong? Who's playing on the arcades, right? Who's out walking around on the campus? You see men all the time, socializing, networking, drinking coffee, right? And women are running around like crazy people because we are busy, but we also are such perfectionists. It's so important for us to get everything done. We want to do it all ourselves, right? And because we're very task-oriented that way, that in some ways that hurts us because that does exclude us from some of those conversations that we need to have. So the only reason why I'm bringing that up is I don't think that actually it's unique that you come in and don't talk to any, and say, look, if I don't say hi, I'm just because I'm focused and I want to get stuff done. But actually to kind of start to think, wow, who should I be networking with a little bit or chit-chatting with a little bit when I walk in? It was funny, Elizabeth Gilbert, the woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love.
Oh, I love Elizabeth Gilbert. She's amazing.
She's fantastic.
Yes.
So I saw her speak at an event here in Phoenix, and she said, the one word you don't associate with women is the word relaxed. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so accurate, right? And I think this, but you see that men often at least give a perception or an attitude of being relaxed, right, in the workplace, particularly the higher up they go.
But do you think, Melissa, that a lot of that has to do with that many of us are juggling a lot of plates? So regardless of whether we're mothers, we're still juggling plates because we still have these expectations outside of work of what is a woman's job and what is a man's job, and everything just kind of flows together. So in many ways, I think it's difficult for women to take on that relax.
Yes.
Because men seem to be, and again, we're talking in generalizations, focused on work, and that's kind of the way they've been raised is they work,
Right. Work, get things done, take care of it all, right. Don't ask for help. So, a lot of us are really bad at delegating. And it's interesting. There's so much I could say about this topic. So I just saw this article in the American Bar Association about why women associates aren't making partner. And it made me so upset because 3 out of the 5 main statistics they quoted or pieces of data they quoted to why this was the case, 3 of them, one was primary childcare, had primary responsibility for childcare, had primary responsibility for cooking dinner. This was literally what they said is one of their primary data points that came out of this. And then, what was the other one? Anyway, I can't remember, but they were all kind of home related or outside of work related. Right. And it just made me crazy because I thought, yes, there's discrimination. Yes, they have to fight stereotypes and perceptions in a law firm or in the workplace. But these 3 things, I'm like, we can manage those. Stop cooking, right? Get a delivery service. Tell your partner to cook if you have a partner. Get your kids to cook if they're old enough to cook. It was just amazing to me when I saw that. And tell the childcare people, stop calling me. Sometimes you got to call the other person who's responsible or whatever. Obviously there's a lot of single parents, so it's not always possible. But it was just fascinating to see, we're such incredible leaders and managers in the workplace. We need to get better at doing that at home as women. If the data is showing up like this, to me, this data shouldn't even be there anymore as reasons why we're not making partner in a law firm.
I feel like my mother was kind of ahead of her time because she always told me she ran her home like a business.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what she told me. I run this home like a business. And I mean, she was very financially savvy and investing and all of that. So she taught me those things. But,
Yeah.
and that brings up a whole, and I'm opening another can of worms, just recently, I think it was yesterday, the news broke that with Jeff Bezos of Amazon that the Mamazonians, as they're called, a group of women are, petitioning for daycare. But what was interesting is why is it just a group of women?
Yes.
Because not just women raise children. We have gay couples. We have men who raise children. We have, and I thought that was kind of interesting, kind of perpetuating that kind of
That's right.
myth again that, the world has changed. Whether we like it or not, we're not back in the pioneer times.
That's right.
No,
And I
it's
think,
2019. So,
yeah, that's an excellent point, Valerie. I think what I really fundamentally see it as is a sense of responsibility, and I would even go so far as to say guilt. Women, for whatever reason, we live with a lot of guilty feelings. This is, I think, why we say we're sorry a lot. This is why we say, the sentence, I feel bad. I hear that so much, particularly from young women. Oh, I feel bad, this and that. I mean, I had a woman from BMW call me about re-upping my car lease, and she's new into sales. And she was, and because she was so new, the way she was talking to me, I said, well, it probably sounds like I should come in and talk to a salesperson, but she hadn't introduced herself to as a salesperson. So
right.
actually, I'd love it if you came in and talked to me because I'm a salesperson and I knew I'm trying to build my portfolio. And I said, oh my gosh, yeah, of course, I'd love to come talk to you. I didn't realize that you were a salesperson. And she goes, oh, I feel bad. Yeah, I'm not very, assertive yet, but, hopefully I'll get better. And I just thought to myself, oh no, I'm like, will you be my coaching client?
I know.
Right. And I really appreciated that she was open about it. Right. But that phrase just always makes me wince. Right. I feel bad. So I think we feel a lot of responsibility, a lot of guilt. My sister-in-law, another story I tell, she's in a leadership role in alumni at Harvard University, and she works with the president of Harvard and so forth. And she's got this amazing job, and she has 2 kids. And when I'm visiting, I'll often see her at like midnight making homemade brownies or cupcakes or something. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're up at 4:30. You're traveling around with the president of Harvard. You have this incredibly high-powered job. You have to get Oprah on the stage at like Harvard's graduation. What are you doing? She's like, well, it's Isaac's birthday, my nephew, and you have to make sure that he has the right, something to take to school. And I was like, buy them cupcakes at Safeway. What are you doing? The kids don't even notice what's homemade or not homemade. They're just happy to have any kind of sweets, right? But it's a sense of responsibility, sense of duty, etc. So I don't know how we shape that or modify that. And I also really love it about us that we have that sense of responsibility because, often, and men say this to me all the time, if I put a project in a woman's hands, she's going to get it done. And for good or for bad, they delegate that stuff, those projects to us. But there is an appreciation for being on point and getting things done and working hard. But I think there is something about letting go of the guilt a little bit. We need to be better at.
Well, I think this is where too mentorship is so important. So, looking back again at the pioneer days, women would get together and they would make a quilt. So that was kind of how they had community, was they would all sit in a circle, they would talk, they would do, and with our modern kind of communities, I don't think women are doing as good of a job at doing this with each other. And I think especially as divisive as things have gotten, even generationally, we're calling people millennials and baby, putting labels on people, and we're just people. And we're women, we're young women, we're middle-aged women, older women, that there's really good opportunities even for cross-mentoring. And that's where I think that's so helpful, where we can have somebody say, you know what, I experienced that same thing. And it's interesting because this week I was talking to women of different ages, and when I was younger, I was petrified to walk into a room with a bunch of men. That scared me. I thought I was alone. And I talked to young women and older women. They said, yes, me too.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of scary, and I didn't know how to communicate, and I just kind of, sat down in the chair. And so if now I've through experience, I've gotten a lot more confident. If we can share that with younger women, what did I do
Right.
to kind of overcome that? And maybe having an older woman who feels more confident saying to that woman, come on into the room, let's sit here, or something like
Yes.
that. You know what I mean? Communicating that.
Yeah, that's right. I think mentorship is critical. And it makes me kind of sad because I hear a lot, well, I do this internationally, and I hear it more outside of the US that women don't necessarily feel like women support them, and they actually prefer to work with men, especially the younger women, because they feel as though there's a lot of jealousy or
I hear that all the time.
Yeah. And especially now, I think there's a trend in some organizations where they're trying to hire a lot of younger folks into the organizations. And this, of course, this exists, but I really like to see us start to look at that as how can we mentor each other better? How can we support each other better? Because the reality is that the more we support each other, the more the opportunities that we'll all get access to. I really believe with that.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to kind of look here in the chat. I'm going to scroll up a little bit, take a couple of moments, make sure that I'm addressing it. Looks like we have some great conversations about being task-oriented.
Yeah.
I think that Laura, I saw something earlier I wanted to address, was kind of how we can support other women. And Laura, help me if I'm not getting this right. When we hear somebody kind of communicating in a way that's not helpful or that doesn't, I'm just trying. Oh, she says, how do we support other women when we observe these behaviors in them?
Behaviors that are kind of jealousy and
maybe Laura can type in here if you could, Laura. What it could, I don't know if it was behaviors or maybe saying I'm sorry or something. Maybe she can put something in there.
So depending on the context.
Oh, she said she's referring to constant apologizing or asking for help.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for clarifying.
How to mentor. I mean, I think it'd be interesting to refer to some of the research so that, I love using a feedback framework where you really speak to what is your intention for giving this person feedback, and then talk about what you've observed factually, and then talk about the impact, and then really share with that person what is the impact, how that's been supported by data. So there's a new book out there, and I was just looking for the author's name. I feel badly, I can't remember it because it's brand new, but she talks about gender energies. And it's really interesting that she talks about all of the, situation behavior feedback is also a great model. So giving that feedback so that they really understand what your intention is around that feedback, and then also supporting that with the latest research that have been coming out, whether it's the Confidence Code or this book that's around gender energies. There's also another book, What Men Don't Tell Women About Business, which is a very controversial but very interesting book that shows really the perception of men, but hardcore perception. So I put a little disclaimer there because it's a tough book to read. But you read it and you go, oh my gosh. Yeah. So I think just having those feedback conversations and making it clear that it's not you, it's like what is true of the dynamics between men and women.
I love those words you use, gender energy. Can you talk a little bit more about that gender energy? I never heard that.
Yeah, I wish I had invented it. And if her name will come to me, or maybe someone can multitask and look up the name of this author. But it's a new book that's come out, and it's I'm trying to think if I can remember the title. But if
you remember it later, you can email me, or I'll check with you, and I can put it in our Slack channel too.
And essentially what she's trying to do is get away from this really binary way that we're talking about gender, where men are like this and women are like this, or that we are like that. And she tries to say these are the energies that we've been kind of conditioned with, and that they're not bad, and that it's actually good to have both energies in an organization because, as you know, there are a lot of companies that also are hiring more women into sales positions or more women into call center because we're really great at listening and coaching and asking questions, and that's like natural for us, for many of us. And so capitalizing on female and male energies in an organization is what she talks about, which I think is really great. And then, having men be really tougher in negotiations or in being more comfortable with that and not being afraid to be hated or having a fight in a meeting and then go out with the same person afterwards and play soccer or have a beer. And there's just these qualities which she refers to as energies that I think are it's really an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, it is. So I'm thinking again, kind of bringing it back around, to learning and development and developing, for instance, e-learning. And I would really like to kind of talk about, so you do have some background in instructional design, right?
Yes.
Yeah, in instructional design. How are we, and maybe this is something I would love if the group in chat would share with us, how are we perpetuating some of these myths in our e-learning, and how are we challenging some of those communications? Because I see sometimes in e-learning, if we're doing something in a conference room, we'll put the kind of strong energy on the man who or character may be talking. So can we talk a little bit about that, or maybe you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think we just it's funny that you even said that because I realized I just put together a presentation that I'm doing later today, and I looked at a couple of the images I was choosing, and I just consciously always think, I need to have a good mixture of men and women. I want to have a good mixture of ages. I want to have a good mixture of cultures. And so I think if we can just have that be integral to the way that we design, right? Just constantly thinking, what kind of diversity do I need to be showing here? Am I showing any kind of bias here in terms of who's leading a meeting or who's taking notes in a meeting or who's speaking? I guess it's fascinating too, because I think we use those sometimes positively, maybe, I don't know if you could say that exactly, but I've heard that the reason why, for example, Siri's voice is a woman is, or by default, is because men will be more comfortable taking advice from a woman. And women are also okay with taking advice from women. So that's part of the reason why that's that way that is. So I guess I would just say, just in short, there's so much to say about it, but just that we constantly check in, right? And I just do that naturally, where just because I want to make sure, am I being sensitive to my audience, right? Have I covered all my bases as much as I can?
Yeah, it's the first step, I think, is really being aware, and it's really using critical thinking. And I think a lot of it too is being open to conversations. So sometimes we're afraid to maybe bring that up with somebody who's of different skin color or different culture because we don't want to offend them.
Yes.
Maybe even more so with women. We don't want to offend people, many of us.
Right.
And sometimes I think people I've found are more than happy to share that. If I've done peer review with somebody who's Indian, can you peer review this? Do you feel that this is something relatable to you or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, peer review is good. That's a great idea. I was just thinking, even in terms of so colleague circles, certainly, I find it interesting that I observe that we often hang out with people in organizations that are sort of like us. They might be similar ages, certainly similar backgrounds, right? We just gravitate naturally to people who are like us. And so sometimes we forget that, wow, we have a whole organization out there which is probably pretty diverse that we could tap into. I mean, you might even have affinity groups in your, sometimes learning and development is sort of separate from diversity and then separate from HR. So these are like 3 different departments. But if you could tap into diversity and say, look, can I just hang out with your affinity groups or the leaders of your affinity groups and run this project by them so that I could get some input? Am I looking through this with an open mind or, through multiple lenses?
Yeah, I purposely put myself in situations with people very different than me. And I know we've talked about mentoring during this webcast before, and I said, look for somebody who's very different from you to mentor you. Again, we look for people who are like us. Those are the people that we learn from.
Right.
Somebody here in the chat said something, I think it was Laura who said that. And thank you, Laura, for sharing the link to What Men Don't Tell Women About Business. She says, I have a client that has a very female-oriented product, yet a lot of male employees, and this entire style guide for various shades of pink. What is this saying to the males who are taking the course? So we're even going beyond that, thinking color.
Well, I just had this really interesting
us, and what does that? Because we're talking about communication. What does that communicate?
Yeah, the colors.
Yeah.
I had this super interesting conversation with a friend of mine. So he happens to be a gay man, and he just developed his own website, and he's got tons of pink in the website. And he's a business consultant. And he showed this to a couple people, and people reacted very harshly, especially women, telling him, you got to get the pink out of there. I mean, no one wants to look at pink ice cream and pink stuff in a professional website. And so we started doing research on pink, the color pink. And apparently it was the color of aristocrats, and you were considered extremely important, and mostly males were wearing pink because it was like this whole sign of power and prowess, etc. back in the day. And so now I said to him, we need to reimagine pink. What you need to do is kind of bring that all back, right?
Right.
Because that would just kind of throw everything on its head today. And I think it's such a relevant conversation, right? To how are we being binary about colors? I mean, in fact, it's funny because I also just learned that blue was originally the color for girls and pink was originally the color for boys.
Oh, really? That's fascinating. Yeah.
Yes. I just found that out. And I'm not getting all my facts perfect in this, but I think when toy stores started to separate out girls and boys sections, and so now it's actually so sad because I think this happened in the early 80s. And so what was sad about it is that, now when kids go into a store, they have to pick a side to go look at, oh, I'm a girl, so I should go to the girl's side, or I'm a boy, I should go to the boy's side, right? And that's not really cool. It'd be nice if you could just go over to all sides. But anyway, originally, it was blue for girls and pink for boys. And then for whatever reason, when the toy stores started to separate, they mixed it up. It was sort of an accident. And they chose pink for girls and blue for boys. And then it's been that way ever since.
Yeah. So that again goes back to, it's really all about conditioning.
Right.
That's
right.
And how we communicate and all of that. So I wonder, as we continue with different generations, how that's kind of evolving. I mean, it already is evolving with gender differences, not just men, not just women.
Right.
So
right.
I find that fascinating. Let's see. So what I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about in our time left is what are some specific actions? Because I think I really want to have people take things away from this. What are some of the specific actions women can take to pivot their careers positively and kind of utilize communication in a positive way to, move their careers forward?
Yeah. So one of the things I teach is something called the 3S method. And
what is it?
Triple S. So it's situation, solution, support. And what I say is that with women, one of the things let me say this. When I ask men, I usually have them get up and write on a flip chart, what are all the things we think about women? And that's so fun to see. And
can you share some of that?
Yeah, I'm going to share right now. So
good.
usually the top 3 are confusing, talk too much, and manipulative. Really. Usually the top 3, or for sure in the top 3. And what I think all 3 of those are really about the amount of words that we use when we're talking, and also the way we use words. So men tend to be, and again, this is really general, so please don't throw tomatoes at me virtually, but men tend to appreciate really direct communication. So instead of saying, hey, when you get a chance, could you please take out the trash? I'd really appreciate it because it really smells, blah, 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 right? Just, hey, take out the trash when you get a second, appreciate it. Just really direct. And we just don't always communicate that way as women. So what I try to do is say, look, if you're asking for a raise, if you're trying to convince a man to buy a product, if you're trying to convince your manager about an idea, try situation, solution, support, which is one sentence, a situation, one sentence, the solution. And then, most important, particularly with men, what is the actual thing you want them to do? So the other thing that happens is that I will say, so for example, I might say to you, Valerie, hey, I was really thinking about changing jobs. Or I'd start with a situation. I am really bored. I'm not sure what to do next, but I was thinking about changing jobs. So situation is I'm bored. Solution is I want to change jobs. As a woman, you would immediately start saying, oh, what are you interested in? And what do you think you could do? And what else would you like? And we get into this whole conversation, and some kind of a support, meaning an action item, would evolve out of that conversation potentially, maybe multiple action items. If I do that with a man, I'm really bored and, I'm kind of thinking about changing jobs, especially if I'm doing that to my manager, a man will typically go, okay. Mm-hmm. And if he's good at listening, he may listen to me well in that moment. And then I'm going to leave that meeting possibly either feeling that he didn't listen if he's not necessarily good at listening, and B, he did listen, but I'm going to be excited because he's probably going to help me with some kind of a solution or support, right, or action around finding a new job. But because then I'll go back 2 weeks later and he's like, so what's up? And I'm like, well, I'm still thinking about a new job. And he'll go, what? Okay, so how are you coming on that? And my intention is to get him to offer me some kind of specific solution on that or specific support on that. And basically, I'm not getting it because I haven't asked for it. So a better way to do it is for me to say, I'm bored, I'm looking for a new job. Could you introduce me to 3 people in the organization that could be helpful for me, that might be interesting for me to get to know, to explore new opportunities, right? Or could you recommend me for this position with this team because I saw what they're doing, it's pretty interesting. So as specific as we can be about asking for support from a man, the better chances are that we're going to get it.
So being less vague. Sometimes I think women using a lot of words again, being vague instead of getting right to the point.
Right.
Bullet point it.
Right, exactly. Or buy this product, or recommend this product, or recommend me to. It's been interesting because I'm in the middle of doing business development because my organization's in high growth mode. And I've been talking to a lot of men, and I've had to really refine my pitch to say, I'd like an introduction to so-and-so. I'd like you to consider me for that. I'd like you to introduce me, but it's really, it's challenging for me because I'm so used to having a much more collaborative conversation because I work with a lot of women. And
not even saying I'd like, how about saying, can you introduce me to somebody?
That's right. Good point. Yeah.
Because you say, I'd like you to, or could you please, or again, have this like, sorry, it's almost like, sorry, I'm asking you for this help.
You're right. Yeah.
And I think that's where the difficult thing is. We are women. There are differences. We want to kind of maintain those differences. And I'm just kind of thinking myself, I've always been very direct, but society has kind of pulled me back, or my family's pulled me back, or my mother's pulled me back saying, you can't behave that way.
That's
So we
right.
get all these different messages.
That's right.
And how do we work through that? How do we?
I wish I had the answer. All I can say is I just keep promoting in my workshops with women. I do networking and career advancement strategies with women, and the biggest message is, look, we're going to learn a bunch of stuff here, but the key thing is that we just keep trying to find our authentic selves and position in organizations. And I think we have a moral responsibility as women to take leadership positions. That's why when I hear women holding themselves back from those leadership positions because of time or not sure or fear or whatever, so please go for it, because the more women we have in leadership, the more authentic we can bring ourselves to the table, right?
Yeah. So any kind of final thoughts? We have about, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes left on kind of what we've talked about today, or kind of some of the things we can go out and maybe work on today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd say, whenever, especially coming back to design, right, and instructional design, I think whenever you can have a diverse perspective, like I'd love to see companies start to have gender balance or gender equity or whatever you want to call it, groups that are working on what does it mean to be men and women in leadership positions together. I'd love to see the women's leadership groups, which I think are very important. I'm not saying they aren't, but I'd love to see either in addition or see those transform to include men more and to have women and men working together in those. Because I think if we can start to have those really honest conversations where we see where men are vulnerable, because the cool thing about doing workshops with men is by the end of day 1 and into day 2, the men are just like writing down everything I'm saying because they're so vulnerable, and they're like, wow, I had no idea that I was hurting someone or interrupting someone or saying the wrong words. How do I say that? I'm going to practice that at home, right? And I think that's really important that we understand their vulnerability, they understand ours, that we find some common ground, right? And be able to work on things together so that we can get this gender balance, gender imbalance, gender inequity, and even worse, sadly, we're hearing a lot about that today in the news, remedied. We really need that fixed.
Yeah. And I shouldn't even bring this up in the last couple of moments, but then there's the Me Too movement that's having backlash, so that a lot of men in leadership positions don't want to work with women and are avoiding working with women because they're afraid that they're going to be, accused of something.
And it's going to be a huge loss to their business, because it's just absolutely impossible to operate today without diversity, especially at the leadership level. You can't. You will not be successful. So it's going to be a huge loss to them. So I hope that they can get over it and start having some conversations with their girlfriends, wives, best friends to try to overcome that.
Yeah. So I know the tech industry has been kind of has had a lot of issues with women in tech. What are some of your thoughts kind of around that, or what you've seen, or, how women kind of forge paths in the tech?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of women have been successful in tech, which is cool. But I think just to continue to say, I guess female leaders, I think what's important, especially when they're at the top, is to remember that there are a lot of women in the organization that would like to be able to do what they do. 87% of women are ambitious. Yeah. Which I think is important for people to know. And so for just when you become a leader, to not forget, to your point, Valerie, to mentor and support and create opportunities for other women.
So it looks like we are at time. Didn't that go fast?
Well, it did for me.
Say, by the way, I like your shoes. We talked about that earlier, that women have a tendency to do that. I love what you're wearing, and then we go into business.
That's right.
I loved your shoes today. But thank you so much, and for taking the time. I know you have a very busy schedule. You've been just an amazing guest, Melissa, and I hope we can maybe have you back and talk about this, because this is a huge, huge subject. but you have been a wealth of knowledge and just given us some great information.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Love to come back. And thanks everyone for listening and being here.
Yes.
Happy to
And good luck this afternoon on your presentation or this afternoon. So thank you everybody for coming, and have a wonderful International Women's Day on Friday, and have a good rest of the month.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Yeah. All the best.
Bye.